why are you motivated to do research on Émilie de Châtelet?
Well, I think there's been a recent revival of interest in rationalist philosophy, broadly speaking, in the last 40 or 50 years, as opposed to empiricism. But there's kind of a lingering question about how rationalism works and whether it's always wedded to a very ambitious metaphysics and maybe overreaching systematic ambitions. And that's still sort of an unresolved question in contemporary philosophy. So I think it's worth going back to the early modern period to look at the varieties of broadly rationalist philosophy that existed then, some of which are maybe very systematic and have very strong metaphysical commitments. One thinks here of Spinoza or Leibniz or maybe even Hegel a bit later on. But there are also maybe these more modest forms of rationalism that are less metaphysically committal, or at least less have fewer realist commitments metaphysically, and perhaps wed rationalism to a kind of metaphysical idealism and maybe a more naturalistic approach to philosophy. And so when I found out about Châtelet, I gradually learned that she sort of fits exactly this sort of mold. She's someone who is coming in some ways out of a rationalist tradition in philosophy from Leibniz and Wolff, but is a fairly strong idealist about the world around us. She thinks it depends on our minds to an even greater extent than those predecessors do. And she has a very strong commitment to Newtonian empiricism, at least I think. This is controversial. So there's a kind of more empiricist-oriented modesty about some of her approach within this rationalist framework. So I think for that reason, her philosophy is very, very worth revisiting or learning about, even from a contemporary perspective, because I think it actually carves out a pretty attractive position from our point of view on science, metaphysics, and epistemology.
Okay, great. And what is the most significant discovery you have made up till now?
Well, I don't know about the most significant, but one significant thing that has come up in our work on the unpublished Paris manuscript of du Châtelet's Institutions de Physique is a long discussion of magnitudes, meaning sort of what corresponds to quantities in the world. So this is a passage that doesn't appear in the published version of this book, but it goes into a lot of interesting detail about what is a magnitude, how we know about magnitudes, and how we communicate about magnitudes. And we don't know exactly why du Châtelet didn't include this in the final version. It might just be for reasons of space. But it's very interesting because it sheds a lot of light on questions raised by the published version of the book, where in the published version, du Châtelet makes these very strong claims about mathematics. She says that the physical world is as it's described in geometry, in mathematics. So there's a kind of strong correspondence there. But she also says that mathematics is fictional and a product of abstraction. So it seems to be not so real after all. And that might seem to raise suggest a kind of conflict or a tension, at least, between her views on mathematics. But I think this manuscript passage that goes into a lot more detail about what a magnitude is and how we know about it can help ease some of these tensions and sort of show that she has a consistent, though complex, account of how both mathematics and magnitudes in the physical world work. So I'm currently writing a chapter for an edited volume that kind of talks about both the published version of the book, but also draws on this manuscript passage, which, as far as I know, no one has written on before. So I think that's one significant discovery, I hope.
And would you like to elaborate a bit on the project Paris manuscript? And what do you hope to contribute to research in the future?
Oh, good, right. So this is something I'm involved with along with several other folks here at the center. So there's this manuscript that has been kind of available in manuscript form for a while, where du Châtelet is drafting her Institutions de Physique, which is probably her main work. At least it's her most sustained original philosophical work. And the manuscript is about twice as many pages as the final version of the book. So there's a lot in there. people have only talked about just a few scattered pages of it so far because, it's this handwritten manuscript that no one's really gone through in full yet. So what we want to do is make it much easier for other researchers to, gain insights from this manuscript themselves by transcribing it and putting it online, making it freely available, also with a commentary and a modern French edition. So hopefully there can be a lot more scholarly research on this manuscript. And we're also doing research on it ourselves. And I think, in terms of things to look forward to, or that I'm looking forward to personally with the manuscript, is that right now we've reached a point in the transcription process where we've gotten to some chapters that are very important because they deal with Newton's physics, and especially Newton's views on attraction or gravitation, and also with Newton's methodology. And this is sort of one of the big interpretive questions about du Châtelet's institution, is exactly how it relates to Newton and Newton's rules of philosophizing, whether she endorses these or not. And whatever the conclusion is here, we do know that she says a lot more about Newton in the manuscript. So I'm really excited to go and read that carefully and sort of try to understand why there's so much on Newton's rules of reasoning in the manuscript, maybe why there's less in the published version, what that means about the development of her views and about her final position. So hopefully in the coming months, we'll have more answers to those.